My name is Teresa Snyder, and I'm a dietitian here at the Cardiac Rehab Program. And our other dietitian, Nancy, who you may have met with, also helped develop this. And she is actually on vacation because she's getting married on Saturday. So what we're going to talk about today is the variety of different styles of eating. Now, it says diets up there, but I don't really like the word diets. A diet is the way you eat, not going on a diet. So if I mention diet, what I mean is your style of eating, and often I'll use that style of eating because diet has a negative connotation for most people, and diets don't really work. So we're not really talking about a weight reduction diet. We're talking about a style of eating. So we'll talk about 4 primary ones that have been shown to be helpful for heart health: the portfolio diet, the lifestyle heart trial, which is Dean Ornish's work, the therapeutic lifestyle changes, or TLC, which is the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute guidelines and the American Heart Association guidelines for heart health eating, and the Mediterranean style of eating, which is been very well studied at this point and is thought to be very heart healthy. So the portfolio diet was a study, very well done study, that included a variety of a portfolio, that's why it's called portfolio diet, of different foods that are thought to be heart healthy. It was vegetarian, so quite a switch if you're a meat and potatoes person, quite a switch from that. Vegetarian, the main protein source was soy protein in the form of different natural soy products or in more processed soy products like soy burgers and things like that. Plant stanol and sterol margarines, which are special margarines that have what they call plant stanols in them that actually help lower cholesterol. Almonds, so there was a small amount of almonds every day, and high in soluble fiber, so that's oats, beans, barley, high fiber foods that are thought to help lower cholesterol. And that was compared with a group that took lovastatin and were on a low-fat diet. So this wasn't necessarily low-fat, but it was all vegetarian. So what they found with the portfolio diet was a 28% reduction in LDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol is your bad cholesterol, so that was a pretty significant drop in LDL. So that for some people, that's if they're willing to not eat meat, that's a good way to go because it has a variety of different foods, and it's not real low fat. What we've found with really low fat diets is they're hard to stick to, or styles of eating they're hard to stick to. And one really low fat diet was the Dean Ornish lifestyle heart trials, and he did a number of really good studies. That the diet part of it was vegetarian for the most part. It wasn't vegan, which means no animal products, but any dairy products were non-fat, so non-fat cheese, non-fat milk, so any of the dairy was non-fat, and no meat, and very low fat, 10% of calories coming from fat, so that's very, very low fat, and for most people difficult to stick to, but a lot of people did go through the trial and stick to it. But in addition to the diet part of it, or the eating part of it, there was a whole other treatments, so dealing with other risk factors. So diet is one risk factor for heart disease, but other risk factors, smoking, so part of the program was smoking cessation, exercise, lack of physical activity is a risk factor, so exercise 3 hours a week. Stress management, they went to stress management 1 hour a day, and had group support sessions 1 to 2 times a week because that can be important for heart health also. So it wasn't just a diet, it was a whole program. And what they found after a year was a 24% reduction in total cholesterol. So your total cholesterol went down. 37% reduction in the bad cholesterol, the LDL. 5% reduction in blood pressure, which high blood pressure is a risk factor for heart disease. 11% reduction in body weight. So it wasn't a diet to lose weight, but many people did lose weight on this. And this is the only program that I know of that actually the plaque improved. So usually you can prevent future plaques from forming or help prevent future plaques from forming by changes in lifestyle, but the only lifestyle intervention that has shown a reversal of plaques is this. So the blockages were actually reduced by 5.5%. So that's significant because no other lifestyle changes have shown that. You can prevent future things from happening, but not reverse those things that are already there. And that was Ornish. So that was this. Has anyone ever seen this? Eat More, Weigh Less. That's the Dean Ornish program. This is This is 1993. He's probably got a newer edition. But if you're interested in that sort of style of eating, there's a book on it, and he talks about the whole program, and there's recipes in here and menu plans. But remember, it is a whole program. It's not just a diet. So diet is one aspect of lowering your risk, but there are other things. And that's sort of what we deal with here, too, is working on, you work on your physical activity, and we have classes in stress management and smoking cessation if needed. So the Therapeutic Lifestyle Change Diet, which is, again, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute and American Heart Association, that style is sort of what we promote here, although we really take it on an individual basis, and we're sort of partly this and partly Mediterranean here, but really looking at what any individual really wants to do with their eating. But the TLC is less than 7% of the day's calories from fat, saturated fat. So that for most people is about 10 to 15 grams. So for women who need fewer calories, that's about 10 grams of saturated fat a day. For men, that's about 15. So that's not very much. So low in saturated fat, because saturated fat is what they have found raises cholesterol and leads to clogged arteries. Moderate in total fat, so it's not real low fat. Remember, the Ornish was 10% total fat, and that was very low. It's 25 to 35% of total fat. Less than 200 milligrams of cholesterol a day, so dietary cholesterol. Limiting sodium to 2,400 milligrams a day, and so, to put that in reference, 1 teaspoon of salt has about 2,300 milligrams of sodium. One fast food dish can have a whole day's worth or more. And just enough calories to achieve a healthy weight and reducing blood cholesterol levels. So a balance of calories so that you're not gaining, and if there's excess fat, to lose some of the fat so that the risks will be lower. And American Heart Association puts out some books that follow this kind of plan. This happens to be a low-salt cookbook. But it also follows the TLC style. And they also have on their website, which is americanheart.org, they have a cookbook on their website, and you can search for different recipes or low-salt recipes. So those all follow along with this TLC. So Mediterranean. So Mediterranean is pretty hot right now, and it's actually been studied for a very long time. In the 50s or 60s is when a guy named Ansel Keys discovered that, he was a researcher, discovered that people along the Mediterranean Sea had low rates of heart disease. and looked at a bunch of reasons why that might be, and their style of eating is one reason. So Mediterranean, if you think about the countries around the Mediterranean Sea, their cuisines are very different, but they have a lot of similarities in the types of food that they eat. So the spices might be different and the particular foods might be different, but there are certain similarities. They have most of their food comes from plant sources, so it's not a high animal protein diet. It's most of the food from plant sources. So if you look at a plate, this is not for Mediterranean, but this is an example of what a Mediterranean style would be. You can see the grains and the vegetables and fruit take up most of the plate. So that would be representative of a Mediterranean style in the whole diet and in their plate. Okay, so their whole diet is mostly plants with a little bit of animal. And minimally processed and seasonal and local. So Eugene we're lucky in Eugene because we have the opportunity to do a lot of that local and seasonal buying. But in the Mediterranean regions, they're very much local and seasonal, which it gives you the best tasting things usually, and may or may not retain the most nutrients. If you buy things that day and use them that day, you get the most from the nutrients. If something's picked green and shipped across the country, and it hasn't developed its full nutrient content, and also sits in the grocery store for a while and sits in your refrigerator for a while, it loses nutrients along the way. So the best way to do it is to get as fresh as you can. And minimally processed, important. So as close to the way it grew as possible. Olive oil is the primary fat used in cooking and in added fats. Total fat is not real low. It's 25 to 35% of calories. And in some studies I've seen up to 40% of calories. So it's not a low-fat diet, and which is one of the reasons it's enjoyable, because fat gives food flavor and helps with satiety. So fat carries flavor. So the real low-fat diets are sometimes hard to stick to because they don't have much fat and they're not all that satisfying. And even though the total fat was moderate, the saturated fat was still less than 7 to 8% of calories. So the same thing with the TLC, the fat was low, the saturated fat was low there. So even though the fat is moderate, the saturated fat is low. So that means not lots of dairy products, not lots of meat, and the fats that they're eating are mostly from plants, because plants, for the most part, aren't highly saturated. It's the animal products that are. So this kind of spells out, and this is in your packet, it spells out the frequency of the foods that they eat in Mediterranean style of eating. So fish, very important, at least 2 to 3 times a week. Chicken, 2 to 3 times a week, so that's those are the primary animal foods. Eggs, 0 to 4 times a week. And red meat, notice red meat, how sparse it is in the diet, 12 to 16 ounces a month. So if you go out to Outback and you get a steak, how many ounces is that? Yes, so that would be a month's worth or more. So, so 12 to 16 ounces a month, that's about 4 ounces, 3 to 4 ounces a week. So basically 1 red meat dish a week in this Mediterranean style. And lean meats, and so 3 to 4 ounces is about this much or this much. So it's more of a, meat actually is more of a garnish than the centerpiece of the meal. Fresh fruit, and by the way, red meat is lamb and pork in addition to beef. So.
Not the other one.
pork, is not the other white meat. Now, certainly pork, you can buy lean pork and you can buy fatty pork just like beef, so you always want to buy the leanest that you can. So fresh fruit is the typical daily dessert, so no cakes and pies and cookies typically, but they mostly have fresh fruit. And when you think Mediterranean, what are you thinking? Well, I think baklava because I love it, or cannoli. But that's not what they have every day. Those are special foods. Regular physical activity, so they were very active, and moderate consumption of wine, typically red wine, normally with meals. And important, the amounts here, 1 glass, so that's 5 ounces a day for women, and up to 2 glasses, so 10 ounces a day for men. And that is part of the Mediterranean style. Now, I'm not recommending that you go out and start drinking if you're not drinking right now. But if you do consume alcohol, certainly always let your doctor know that. Alcohol can interact with some medications. Also, there are negative effects to alcohol, which is why alcohol is not a health recommendation to help prevent heart disease. But studies do show that alcohol can help increase HDL and can have other effects in your body that are, in general, go toward heart health. So you kind of have to weigh the benefits and risk of alcohol and decide for yourself what is best for you. And always look into whether it's interacting with any medications. So in the Mediterranean style, it's wine that they're drinking. Wine also has other antioxidants in it, too, that might be helpful for heart health. With meals, so it's not, it's not saving up it's regular consumption, so it's not saving up the 1 glass a day for the weekend. That's what I tell my students at LCC, that, you don't drink the whole amount over the weekend. It's every day that's the important thing. So wine, you have to decide for yourself whether it's appropriate for you. Okay, so all those styles of eating we talked about. Oops. Similarities. Think about those foods in those styles of eating. Lots of plants and minimally processed, so whole grains, fruits and vegetables, beans, they all contained an abundance of those foods. They're all low in saturated fat, remember 10 or 15 grams a day at most. They included low-fat or fat-free dairy, and they were high in omega-3 fats. So those were the similarities. So those are some foods that are thought to be heart-healthy foods for various reasons. And keeping that saturated fat low is very important. Now, we talked about those styles of eating. Oh, and by the way, this is a good book if you are interested in the Mediterranean style of eating. It's called The Omega Diet, and it's by Simopoulos. I'll pass it around if you're interested. So it's got, the rationale behind the different foods and recipes and meal plans. And so if you're interested in that style, take a look at this. So all of those styles of eating I mentioned, Mediterranean, TLC, Portfolio, the Ornish, that's kind of a lot to remember. And if you're a person who really wants things just short and simple, just 2 things that you want to remember. Okay, so you don't have to follow any particular style of eating, but you want to remember these 2 things. Increase your fiber intake to 30 grams per day. The catch there is you do it through food. So you're not taking a fiber supplement, but you're doing it through food. Okay, so eating foods that will give you 30 grams of fiber a day. And decrease your saturated and trans fat, so those 2 combined, to 10 to 15 grams a day. So that's the 7% of calories. So if you're doing those two things, you're necessarily eating more unprocessed or low-processed plant foods. You're necessarily eating less fatty meats and more plants. To achieve those two goals, you are making those changes that are important for heart health. So fiber. And I just want to take a moment to talk about the kernel of wheat or rice or whatever grain it is, because one of the important things that we get from whole grains is fiber. So this bran part is high in fiber. And when we eat refined flour, it's not that refined flour is bad for you. It's that when you eat refined flour, this is called the endosperm of the kernel. When you eat refined flour, this is all that you're getting. This is the fluffy, starchy part of the wheat kernel. So you don't get the bran and you don't get the germ. And what you don't get with those two things is lots of fiber. And you also miss out on some real important vitamins and minerals that you get with the germ and the bran that you miss out if you just eat the starchy part. Also antioxidants that aren't considered vitamins or minerals but are important for health, and things that might not even be discovered yet that are important in this plant. So when you just eat this, you're missing out on a lot. And now when they refine this flour, they do enrich it with some of the vitamins and minerals that it loses through processing. So you'll always see, when you buy something with white flour, you always see enriched white flour. And that's a law that they have to do that. Manufacturers have to put back some of the vitamins and minerals, but there's only a few that they put back. They don't get all of them back in there. And plus those antioxidants, they don't get those in there either. So in addition to the fiber, another good reason to eat whole grains. So good sources of fiber, and this is in your packet too. So if you're thinking about getting up to that 30 grams, think about foods high in fiber. And what are those? Beans, whole grains, fruits and vegetables. So if you're trying to get up to 30 grams, you're going to have to be eating more of those foods. Beans are an especially good source, 6 to 8 grams of fiber per half cup. So that's really good. And the fiber in beans is mostly soluble fiber, which does help lower your cholesterol too. And beans are low fat and are a good source of protein. So if you're trying to cut down on the meat in your diet, beans are a good replacement for that. Finding dishes that use beans is a good idea, or adding beans to things. Oops. So ideas, finding recipes made with beans, or just adding them to salads. So instead of adding cheese or meats to a salad, add some beans. Eating bean dips and hummus instead of cheese and crackers, let's say. So the idea of replacing some of that saturated fat with some things that are high in fiber and heart healthy. Mixing red beans and rice, so bean and rice dish, and then adding them to soups. And as we're coming into winter, that's soups and stews are a good comfort food. So making them with beans is a good idea. Okay, so number 2 on that was decreasing. So we're increasing the fiber, but we're decreasing the saturated and trans fat to 10 to 15 grams a day. So that means most beef and lamb and pork, so keeping that to a minimum. Using low-fat or fat-free dairy instead of full-fat dairy. So whole milk, regular cheese. Cheese is a hard one for a lot of people. We tend to eat a lot of cheese in the United States and in large amounts, so frequently and in large amounts. And cheese has its good properties. It's got calcium, it's got protein, but the problem is that a small amount of cheese has a lot of saturated fat in it. So if you just eat, this is 1 ounce of cheese, so this slice. So 1 ounce has about 6 grams of saturated fat. So if you're eating a lot of cheese, so how much saturated fat are you trying to stick to for the day? 10 to 15 grams, right? So if you were eating 6 just in this piece, there's not a whole lot of room for much else. And most people eat more than just this piece of cheese. So 1% were fat-free milk, fat-free sour cream, or using fat-free plain yogurt instead of sour cream. So making switches to decrease the saturated fat. And tropical oils, those are anomalies in the plant world because they are the only plant oils that are highly saturated. Most plant oils have mostly unsaturated fats, which are heart healthy. But coconut oil and palm kernel oil have a lot of saturated fat, so you have to be careful of those oils. And those are found in different things like creamers and Cool Whip and candy bars and chocolate coatings. So you just have to read labels and see how much saturated fat is in a product you're getting, and not be cooking with these oils. And there are people who think that coconut oil is actually good for your heart, despite the fact that it's highly saturated. And at this point, for myself and anyone I'm recommending oils to, I wouldn't recommend coconut oil. There aren't studies that support that it doesn't clog your arteries. So I would stick to the oils we know are healthy, like olive oil and any vegetable oils. So again, the saturated fat, this is where those recommendations come from, because 7% of fat of 1,500 calories is 10. So most women need 1,600 calories, depends on age and activity level, but that's about 10 for women and about 15 for men. So even if when you're eating lean meat, you want to limit that to about 6 ounces per day, which would be about two decks of cards or 2 3-ounce servings, or 1 6-ounce serving. And the fish, no need to limit unless it's deep-fried fish, which you probably want to limit. But the fish, you can really eat as much fish as you want. The oils you're getting from fish are very beneficial. And fish is typically lean, and even the fattier fish have kinds of fats that are helpful for you. And using low-fat and non-fat dairy products. So that's how you would reach that goal of 10 to 15 grams of saturated fat. The one thing I don't have here is watching the cakes and cookies and candy and all of that stuff, the baked goods and desserts. That's where we get a lot of saturated fat too. Trans fat, I mentioned the trans fat staying under 10 to 15 grams of trans plus saturated fat, but I really think we should just eliminate the trans fat altogether. Saturated fat occurs naturally in foods, and some of it's fine. It's not a bad thing unless you eat too many foods that are high in saturated fat. Trans fat is a different story because it only occurs in very, very small amounts in foods, so meat and dairy products, but very, very small amounts. And the reason that we get a lot of trans fat is because we eat these processed foods that have partially hydrogenated oils in them. And the hydrogenation process of an oil creates trans fat. And what they have found is that trans fat not only raises your bad cholesterol, but it slightly lowers your good cholesterol. So exactly the opposite of what you want to happen. And there's some thinking that it might promote inflammation also, and that inflammation is another factor that's involved in heart disease.
Have they not found a way to take trans fat out of the whole process anyway?
They are, manufacturers are starting to take trans fat out. What you have to be careful of is that they're not replacing it with lots of saturated fat. So that's not going to be much better. So typical foods that have trans fat are cookies, pastries, deep fried foods. So still a lot of fast food restaurants have use trans fat in their cooking, and where that comes from is Crisco, the Crisco shortening. That's high in trans fat. Hard stick margarines, and also things that you might not expect, like some crackers and actually popcorn. This has trans fat. Frozen pizza crusts, which I was shocked. I didn't really realize that they had trans fat. So anything you're buying, you want to look at the labels and make sure that there's no partially hydrogenated vegetable oil in it. So you really want to keep the trans fat to 0. Now the pie you make once a year, if you use shortening, although I think butter actually would be a better choice than shortening. Then if you're eating something like that once in a while, it's not that big of a deal. But trans fat is sort of incorporated into many foods that we buy, so you have to be careful. Okay, so this food, if we look at this food, so it's 1 cup is the serving, and this serving has how much saturated fat are you looking at? 5 grams. And 2 grams of trans fat. And how much sodium? 660 milligrams.
That's a lot for 1 cup of something.
Yeah. And no fiber. So this food, what would you say, heart healthy or not so heart healthy? Not so heart healthy, yeah. Because it's not really, it's providing a little bit of vitamin A, a little bit of some vitamins, but really not a little bit of protein, but it's high in saturated fat and trans fat, so it's going to give you 7 grams toward your 10 or 15 just in 1 cup of this food. And high in sodium, right?
What is
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking that it's
High-fat protein, pudding type food?
Surprisingly, it's a lot of processed food. Looks just like
yeah.
Reading labels this past week, I'm guessing breakfast cereal.
Maybe.
It's possible, yeah.
So
Possible.
there's only 2 servings per container. And there's 2 cups. There's a cup per serving. So maybe it's ice cream. Of course,
It could be ice cream, but ice cream doesn't usually have trans fat.
Ice cream
But
would be 1 serving no matter how big.
that's right. Well, most likely, and that's the other thing with reading labels, you really need to look at the serving size, because most likely whoever's going to eat this is going to eat the container, 2 cups of food. So, and that has to do also with our, perception of portion sizes that is distorted. But just like the high-calorie drinks, there's 2 servings in those bottles, or 2.5 servings in a bottle, and most people drink the whole bottle. So you're getting 2 to 2.5 times what that label actually says. So if you ate this whole container, you're getting 10 grams of saturated fat and 4 grams of trans fat.
Pretty much done for the day.
Yeah. So read labels, real important. If you're trying to modify recipes that you have to cut down on the saturated fat, you can actually cut the amount of fat in half. So if it calls for butter, you can try to cut down on the amount of butter and cut that fat in half. Also, there are mixtures that if you want some butter flavor for some things, there's mixtures. This is butter and half canola oil. So it's got half the saturated fat of butter. Or you can make your own butter, olive oil kind of mixture. So you can cut the amount of fat in half, and you can add some fruit butters and baked goods that works well. If you add applesauce or prune butter, if it's a darker product, or pumpkin, some of those fruit butters work well to replace the moisture without some of the fat. Use light or fat-free ingredients, so like fat-free half and half. You could use for things instead of half and half, or like I said, I use fat-free plain yogurt instead of sour cream. Using egg substitutes, you could do that, or just use the egg whites, because remember, it's the yolk that has a lot of cholesterol. And in lecture number 5, in the other nutrition class, we talk a little about the importance of cholesterol. So the reason the egg yolks are limited is because they have a day's worth of cholesterol in them. So eating too many eggs will give you too much cholesterol. So if you really like eggs, and you want to use them a lot more than about 4 yolks a week, then use the egg substitute for different recipes, or use the egg whites. And try new recipes that are meant to be heart healthy and low in saturated fat, because those usually have been tested to work well without all of the saturated fat. So for your entire day and week, what's important in order to get the fiber and cut down on the saturated fat is to kind of have a plan. So if you go to the store and you don't have a list and you're starving, you usually don't, I don't know about you, but I usually don't make the best choice in terms of heart health and nutrition. So you want to avoid shopping on an empty stomach. And what I do is I usually have some nuts, or if I have nothing with me, I'll buy some relatively heart-healthy granola bars or something like Kashi bars in the store, and I'll just eat one before I shop. And then I pay for them, of course, but so that I'm not shopping on an empty stomach. Lara bars are also. Has anyone ever tried Lara bars? Yeah, they're made with 1 or 2 ingredients and fairly expensive. But if you see them in the grocery store and you're really starving, that's a good thing to eat. They're made with dates and cashews, for example, is one of them. Those are the only ingredients. Plan your meals. So planning your meals, you can plan out heart-healthy things to eat and buy what you need in order to have those meals, so that you have stuff on hand to make those meals. So it does take some planning. And shopping the perimeter. Has anyone ever heard this before? Shopping the perimeter. So if you think about your grocery store, so my grocery store, I walk in and there's the produce, and then I go along to the back, and then there's the meat and the dairy, and then on this side is all the breads, right?
And there's somewhere frozen.
Right. So, and the frozen foods, right? So the meat, produce, dairy, and breads. So certainly you can make better or worse choices among all of those, right? You could choose high-fat meats, or you could choose lots of chicken and fish. The produce, you really can't go wrong there. So the dairy, you could choose high-fat dairy or low-fat dairy. The breads, you could choose muffins and higher-fat items, or you could choose whole grain breads. So you can make better or worse choices along the perimeter, but in general, the perimeter are the least processed, more wholesome foods. Okay, so closer to the ground, or the animal as the moo. So you're making the most wholesome choices if you're shopping the perimeter. With the exception of the middle, the one aisle that has a lot of wholesome things is the grain aisle in the middle, because you can find the whole wheat pasta. A lot of
Is it a bulk aisle, or is it?
The bulk's usually to the side, but yeah, you can find a lot of good stuff in the bulk. But down the middle, you will find the pastas and the rices, and now at a lot of supermarkets, you can find a lot of whole grain varieties of those things. So, but the rest of the middle typically has the highly processed foods, so very high sodium, high fat, high sugar, spam. That's making a comeback, I hear. And the sugary drinks. So the things that have very high sodium, high saturated fat, and typically lower nutritional value. So less bang for your buck. So and the chip aisle, the snack aisle, all of those things. So you can do a lot of damage going through those aisles. So another reason to have a list, and I mean, I don't even go down the chip aisle and the soda aisle at all because I don't buy anything there. But having a list, and if you're going to those aisles, just stopping and picking up what you need there, and not buying most of your diet from those. Once in a while, okay, but soup. They're starting. I think manufacturers are responding to the sodium crisis because everything has so much sodium, and there's not really a reason to have so much sodium in foods, and it is affecting our health. So hopefully eventually we'll see more and more lower sodium good products. So you have to kind of search for them now, but I even notice more now than I did 5 years ago. So.
We bought a bunch of beans at Albertsons, salt beans. I don't know how long it had been since I didn't have salted beans, but this can was cooked and we ate it, and they tasted as if they were fresh.
Yeah.
And it was most odd.
Yeah. So we're so used to
this.
this.
No salt. They taste actually like they're fresh.
Yeah, and those items tend to be more expensive for some reason than the higher sodium items. But in the case of beans, in a pinch you could use those, or you could cook a pot of beans. I did that for the first time several months ago. So cooking a pot of beans and making recipes from that is very cheap and no sodium. So tips for dining out. I won't go through these word for word, but basically, I don't like that first one, the plainest thing on the menu, because that sounds really, really boring. But yeah, what you want is the simplest things. So not something with buttery sauce on it, or you want something that's, say, grilled, or something that's very simple, because in that way you will keep the saturated fat down, typically lower. And you can make other adjustments if you eat out frequently. If you eat out once in a while, it's not that big of a deal. But if you eat out fairly frequently, then that's part of your regular diet at that point. So you want to be choosing things that are low in saturated fat, as low in sodium as you can get, and that are more wholesome. And then there's breakfast and lunch and dinner. So sort of the same principles. And some of these recommendations are also meant for keeping the calories down, like declining the bread basket, for example. So bread's not high in saturated fat, but we tend to overeat, and most of us are trying to watch our weight or lose weight. So watching extras is a good idea. One thing about the fiber, if you are increasing your fiber, I recommend not starting out if you're eating, say, 5 grams of fiber a day now, don't go right away tomorrow to 30 grams of fiber. Just don't go out and buy all these beans and all these whole grains, because you will have a lot of gastrointestinal distress. So yeah, what you want to do is increase slowly, add a high fiber food every day so that your body gets used to it, because you will be in distress if you don't, and then you'll say, oh, I shouldn't know what she was talking about. Like, I don't tolerate fiber, but you do. You just have to work up to it. And let's see. And that is it for our presentation.